I was going to start with a COVID joke, but there's a 99% chance you won't get it. So, what I do, traveling the country as I do, and I speak to Republican groups and conservative groups, is I try to debunk the wrong ideas on which the left is based. You think about the left, it's a big pile of something, but it's a big pile of wrong ideas. And if we understand the illogic behind it, it all falls apart. So I was going to talk to you today about a wrong idea that's been damaging our country, and indeed the entire Western world, for quite some time now. It begins with a 19th century Englishman named Thomas Malthus, who was the granddaddy of overpopulation theory. Malthus explained that the human population grows exponentially, and the food supply only grows arithmetically. And so if you play that out, we're going to run out of food, and we're all going to starve to death and die. And Malthus, who was a mathematician by training, actually went to the trouble of calculating this out. He calculated that the entire world's food supply would be completely exhausted by 1889. So last year, there's going to be even a morsel of food left in the entire world. So when 1889 came and went, there was still plenty of food. You'd say, well, that's the end of Malthus. He's got an idea, and it's wrong. It's time for him to shuffle off to the dustbin of history. But that's not what happened. Malthus is being taught to your kids and your grandkids today at colleges and universities all over America as a genius who warned us about the dangers of overpopulation ahead of his time. And he said some other interesting things too. He said, for instance, that we should not feed the poor. He said what we ought to do is take that money and use it to build swamps. That's what he said. Near where the poor people live. Because the swamps would spread malaria, and the poor people would get malaria and die, and that would help improve our overpopulation problem. And you're probably thinking, saying stuff like that has got to get him into a certain amount of trouble at the modern American university. Well, you're wrong again. It doesn't bother them at all. You just don't understand modern American universities is your problem. So far from being discredited, Malthus gives rise to a whole new generation of overpopulation theorists in the 20th century, the most famous of whom was named Paul Ehrlich. He wrote a book in 1969 called The Population Bomb, and it was a huge international bestseller. 100 million copies, 27 languages. And Ehrlich says this is it. He says the human race has reached its peak. It's all downhill from here. He predicts hundreds of millions of people. We're going to start starving to death any minute. He predicts that 40 million Americans will starve to death before the 1970s are over. So, who wants to guess how many Americans actually starved to death in the 1970s? Do I hear a zero? The correct answer is 0. He was off by 40 million. And don't get me wrong, anybody can make a mistake. But what's fascinating is what's actually happened while these predictions were busy not coming true. You know what's actually been going on in the world? From 1950 to today, the world's population has approximately doubled. We use about a third less farmland than we used in 1950, which is very important because Malthus said we would run out of farmland. Instead, as the population has gotten bigger and bigger and bigger, the amount of farmland we used to feed them has gotten smaller and smaller and smaller, and there is far less hunger and far more prosperity in the world today than anyone thought was possible in 1950. The question is, how and why? Why were Ehrlich and Malthus so wrong? You understand, they weren't slightly off. They were two of the wrongest people in the history of the world. Okay? What did they miss? I checked their math. The numbers all add up. And the answer is that they missed understanding the nature of human beings. See, had Malthus and Ehrlich been talking about some other species other than humans, they probably would have been right. If there's too many deer in the forest, you know what happens? They starve. They do starve. But as the human population increases, we not only don't starve, we get richer instead. Why is that? There's like a force of nature that seems to run one way for human beings and the opposite way for every single other species under the sun. And the answer is that there are two tricks that the human race has that are completely unique. Not only does no other animal do this, there is no other example of either of these in the entire known universe. This is unique human stuff. And the first trick is that we humans innovate. Nothing else innovates. There is no innovation in the universe other than human innovation. How does innovation work? Well, I'll tell you. It begins when an individual human being has an idea. What's an idea? It's when you picture in your mind something that you've never seen because you can't have seen it because it doesn't exist. It exists nowhere but your mind. No animal can do that. No animal can imagine what it's never seen. We humans do it all the time. And then we test out our ideas in a process called experimentation. And I gotta tell you the truth, 99% of the experiments fail, and it doesn't matter. Nobody cares about the failed experiments. Failed experiments blow away like the dust in the wind. It's completely irrelevant. What matters is that 1% of the experiments succeed. And when they succeed, the entire human race takes a step forward. If anybody, anywhere on planet Earth figures out a better way to do anything, you're benefiting from it within 6 months. Did you know that? Every 2 years, I go back to the Verizon store to get another phone and sign another 2-year contract. And it's been a long time now, I've noticed a pattern. Every 2 years I walk in and the first thing they do is they laugh at my old phone. They say, you're using that old clunker that we sold you 2 years ago? That's like riding a horse. That's not a phone, that's a horse. Our phones today are so much better than anything we ever dreamt of 2 years ago. It's not even funny. So, I will confess that I don't really know exactly what all the phone people have figured out in these last 2 years. I certainly don't know who invented it. And I suspect I'll never use most of it. But here's what I also know. Every trick the phone people have figured out in the last 2 years, plus every trick they figured out before the last year, I got it all. Everything the phone people know is in my phone. And if I ever need to use it, I will just ask my kids to explain it to me, and then I'll be able to use it, you see? And if you understand this, you understand that the more humans there are in the world, the more ideas there are in the world. The more ideas, the more experiments. The more experiments, the more successful experiments. And the human race advances faster, farther on a bigger population than a smaller population. And this is the first reason that there is no such thing, which is what I'm here to tell you tonight. There is no such thing as overpopulation for human beings. Amen. With one caveat, it only works, ooh, that sounds way better. It only works if people are free. Because non-free people don't get to experiment because they're not free. So for example, there's 25 million people who live in North Korea. And I bring it up because I think it's the least free country on earth. North Korea is a horrible slave state where there is zero freedom, and they actually are starving in North Korea. Not because of population, but because they're not free. Meanwhile, their South Korean cousins are innovating like crazy. They've got a booming economy, they're at the cutting edge of high tech. They made my phone, the South Koreans. North Koreans can't do this. Why not? They're the same people, they're all related. Used to be one country. And the answer is half is free and half is not free. You could not have a better natural experiment than that. So now I have to amend my statement and say as long as people are free, there's no such thing as overpopulation for human beings. But I've only told you the first trick. There's a second trick that the human race has that's completely unique in the entire known universe. And this one deals not with how we come up with new stuff, but how we handle the information that we've already accumulated in the past. I bet when I told you that the humans are unique among all the different living things on Earth, I bet you said, well, our brains are so big. But are they? I mentioned the deer in the forest before. Is your brain bigger than the deer's brain? I won't hold you in suspense. Yes, your brain is bigger, but how much bigger? Is it 1,000,000 times bigger? 100 times bigger? 10 times? 3 times? It's about 50% bigger, which raises a fascinating question, and that is, how come your life is 1,000,000 times better than the deer's life? Because it is, you know. Look at your life and look at the deer. You could hop on an airplane and be at the other end of the world, you know, in a few hours, and it would be very easy to arrange that, wouldn't it? You could pick up your smartphone and Google up anything that's happened in the history of the universe. You've got art and music and poetry and science and technology, architecture, fashion, cuisine, history, philosophy. The deer is wandering naked through the forest looking for berries to eat. Period. That's his entire life. There's not one day in the deer's life that involves anything other than wandering through the forest looking for berries. Your life is 1,000,000 times better than that deer's life. The only question is, how did you manage to swing it on a brain that's only 50% bigger? And the answer is that we humans have developed a completely unique trick of spreading our knowledge out over the entire populace and allowing for every single one of us every minute of every day to benefit from vast amounts of knowledge which we do not actually have. And to illustrate that, I'll ask you to think for a moment about every single solitary thing that you own. Just take your mind, run it through your house, your furniture, your dishes, your toothbrush, your clothes, your television set. Here's the question. How much of that stuff do you know how to make yourself? Like none of it? Am I close? Okay. How did you get all that stuff that you don't know how to make? And the answer is you don't have to know how to make it because somebody else knows how to make it. Okay? We spread our knowledge out and then we all benefit from this. So for example, I own a car. I drove here tonight in my car. I use it all the time. It's very useful for me. Do I know how to make a car? If I were all by myself in a desert island like Robinson Crusoe, how long do you think it would take me to make a car from scratch? Even if we assume the iron and the rubber and the petroleum is all on my island. Yeah, the answer is never. I could live to be 1,000,000 years old. I will not have made a car from scratch. Truth is, nobody in the world knows how to make a car. There's 1,000,000 people who each know a tiny little piece of how to make a car. And they get together and make a car. I don't know any of the pieces, and I don't have to, because when I need a car, you know what I do? I go to the people who know how to make cars, and they've already made it. They knew I was coming. It's sitting in the lot waiting for me. I just have to pay for it. Through the miracle of capitalism, I get to focus on one small area in which I am reasonably competent and trade the proceeds for the highly specialized skills of 1,000,000 people I've never met. People who made my car don't even speak the same language I speak. Is that a problem? Not at all. What can I do for you, sir?
You talked about how you cannot build a car.
Yes. And I appreciate that. So where we are is that there is no such thing as overpopulation uniquely for human beings. Doesn't apply to any other species. And there are two reasons for it. The fact that we innovate, which means more people, more innovation, which we all benefit from. Okay, so a bigger population. And the second is that we retain our knowledge about how to do things spread out amongst all these brains, 7 billion human brains all over the world. Every trick the human race has learned through the millennia is in those 7 billion brains. How do you make a car? How do you make a skyscraper? How do you perform heart surgery? Okay, we all get access to all of that through this system which we call capitalism. Okay, so if somebody in your family needed heart surgery, what would you do? Learn heart surgery? See if there's a YouTube video on how to do heart surgery? You know, you're going to go to the guy who has spent his life on heart surgery. That's all he does. He's an absolute expert on that. You get the benefit of his highly specialized skill for a very brief period of time when you need it, and then he goes his way and you go yours. We benefit from all of it, and so the more humans there are in the world, it's like the hard drive of the human race. The more humans, the bigger the hard drive, the more knowledge we all benefit from. And so, we could say, it's interesting. Is this important? Why do I need to know this? And there's a couple answers. One is, I think it's important to understand that capitalism, properly understood, is pro-life. Capitalism is about understanding that the greatest gift that God ever gives us is each other. We humans uniquely make each other richer. While every other species under the sun is competing amongst themselves for scarce resources, we're enriching each other. It's a beautiful, uniquely human thing. We ought to celebrate more than we do. Another reason this is important is that there is a movement abroad in our land today which is very evil and very dangerous, I think, because they're you know what it is yet, but you're with me. It's anti-human and anti-prosperity. They think that human beings are bad, and they think that prosperity is worse. And they're teaching it to your kids and your grandkids right now. And I refer to the environmentalist movement. And I think for too long, we Republicans looked at environmentalists as kind of harmless do-gooders, you know? They may be a little quirky, but their heart's in the right place. You know what Bill O'Reilly always used to say? Apparently Bill O'Reilly used to say a whole bunch of things that I was not necessarily aware at the time, you know, that he was saying them. But I always watched his show at 8 o'clock every night, and whenever he had an environmentalist wacko on, he would say, there's nothing wrong with wanting a cleaner planet. I heard him say that dozens of times over the years, and I disagree. I think there's something deeply, profoundly wrong with wanting a cleaner planet. You know what that is? It doesn't make a lick of sense. Do you know what our planet is made of? It's made of dirt. We live on a ball of dirt floating through the galaxy. Is that not so? Well, someone want to explain to me what is the difference between a clean ball of dirt and a dirty ball of dirt?
Still dirt.
This isn't science. This is bad poetry disguised as science, and I, for one, am getting a little tired of being lectured on science by a bunch of people who don't think there's a difference between boys and girls, okay? I'm just saying. And our ball of dirt is about 8,000 miles from here to here. Do you know how deep in we can drill with the latest state-of-the-art 21st century technology? 10 miles. Not even 1%. We barely scratch a fraction of 1% of the Earth's crust. We find stuff, we bring it to other parts of a fraction of 1% of the Earth's crust. We put it through chemical processes that happen in nature all the time anyhow, and we're wrecking the planet? You kidding me? You couldn't wreck the planet if you tried. You couldn't wreck the planet if you devoted your life to wrecking the planet. Nothing you do in your life will harm the planet in any way, shape, or form. Nothing you do in your life will help the planet in any way, shape, or form. The planet is going to outlive us all. I absolutely guarantee that. And again, this is something we need to explain to our kids and our grandkids, because they're getting a very different message from the schools and the media, and it's complete nonsense. And I'll tell you something else. We're never going to run out of anything either, which is very important, because since I was like this tall, I have been hearing my entire life that we were running out of things. Have you not heard this your whole life, that we're running out of stuff? Have we? Have we run out of anything? Don't you think by now we would have run out of something, just so they could hang their hat on it and say, see, we ran out of something? Nothing. I remember when my daughter came home from school one day, and this was years and years ago. My daughter is an old lady now, but years ago, she came home from school and told me we were running out of water. And I said, no, we're not. And if my memory is correct, this was the last year that any of my kids went to a public school. I'm just saying. And I said, no, we're not. Not only are we not running out of water, we have the same amount of water to the drop that we had 1,000 years ago, or 2,000, or 3, pick your year, it doesn't matter. From the beginning of the world till today, we've got the exact same amount of water to the drop. And the next day, I went to work and I told this anecdote to a liberal Democrat friend of mine at work. And he said, well, maybe technically we have the same amount of water, but we have less usable water. And I said, oh, really? Same amount of water. If I'm following you correctly, we must have more unusable water, right? Tell me something. Where do they keep the unusable water? Where is it? Last I checked, 99% of all the water is in the ocean. Is that not still where it is? It's all the usable and the unusable is all mixed together in the ocean. You know what happens? It evaporates out of the ocean into the clouds. I guess that's the usable part. And the clouds come over the land, and it comes down in the form of rain. Perhaps you've heard about this before. And they catch a tiny fraction of this rain in a reservoir, right? And they pipe it to my house. So I'm hosing down my driveway, and my liberal neighbor says, you're wasting water. And I say, no, I'm not. It was going to land on the ground over here. They just caught it in a reservoir, sent it to me, and I'm spraying it on the ground over here. And moreover, it's going to seep into the ground. It's going to work its way back to the ocean, and the whole thing is going to go around. It's been going around from the beginning of the world. You cannot waste water. Cannot, I dare you. Go home, get a glass of water, see if you can make it go away, so that your great-great-grandchildren will not have access to that water. It is impossible to waste water. Now, it is possible that you could live in a particular area that's having a drought. Not because we're running out of water, we're never running out of water, but your particular area did not get as much rainfall as you wanted, and so there's a drought. And it may make sense to conserve water if you're living in a drought, because of the drought. But you know what the long-term solution is? Build more reservoirs. You can pipe water from anywhere to anywhere. You can pipe water 1,000 miles. The Romans were doing this 2,000 years ago. It's not even a new idea. And you can solve the problem forever. And this is very important because you probably read at the time in the papers or on the news that California had a 5-year-long drought. Do you remember that? It ended just a couple years ago. 5 years of drought. And during this drought, the governor of California was a guy named Jerry Brown. Did you hear about him?
Yes.
Did you know that his father had also been governor?
Yes.
Back in the 60s, his father, Pat Brown, was the governor of California. And then during the drought, Jerry Brown, the son, was governor of California. And they were both liberal Democrats. But there's a fascinating difference. Pat Brown, the father, was a great reservoir builder. He built new reservoirs all over California because the population was booming. Hard to believe now, but back then everybody wanted to move to California. That was the place to go. And the population was booming, and he wanted to make sure there was plenty of water. He says, my job as governor to make sure there's enough water for everybody moving to California. His son was governor through 5 years of drought, vetoed every proposal to expand reservoir capacity. Well, what changed between the father and the son? And the answer is that the Democratic Party has been taken over by environmentalist wackos who are anti-human and anti-prosperity. They don't want to solve people's problems. They want people to suffer because they think that people are bad and prosperity is worse. And this is very good news for us because we Republicans are the pro-human, pro-prosperity party. They are the anti-human party. And last I checked, every single voter is a human. Maybe not in California, but in most states, every voter is a human. And being this is not like a risky political, gamble we're taking, being on the side of the humans, okay? It's a pretty safe place to be politically. Okay, so while we're on this, I want to take this in one more direction because it's so relevant to what we're talking about today politically. I said we've got the exact same amount of water from the beginning of the world till today. What else do we have the exact same amount of from the beginning of the world till today? Well, the actual answer is everything. Everything. Because the world is made of a bunch of Legos that we call atoms. Is that not so? I'm an economist. I'm not even a science guy, but I'm pretty sure this is true. The world is made of, theoretically, there's like 120 kinds, but most of those don't really exist. There's a few dozen types of atoms, hydrogen, helium, oxygen, nitrogen, plutonium. That's what the world is made of. We have the exact same atoms in the exact same numbers of each type of atom from the beginning of the world to today. We don't get any new ones in. The ones we got don't leave. Kind of puts pollution in a whole different light when you realize we've got this pot of stew with the exact same ingredients that never ever changes. It just mixes around. And I was thinking about this because I was watching the Tucker Carlson show. He replaced Bill O'Reilly at 8 o'clock. I'm watching somebody at 8 o'clock. And he had on an environmentalist wacko who said, carbon is bad and we have to stop producing it. And I'm thinking, well, first of all, carbon is bad? I took high school chemistry. They didn't tell us there were good atoms and bad atoms. I mean, if elements on the periodic table can have moral failings, my high school chemistry teacher never knew about that. They were just atoms, okay? And moreover, I'm going to go even farther than that, because all life on Earth is based on carbon. No carbon, no life. I say that makes you a good atom. So I am going to go even farther and say carbon is a good atom, not a bad atom. And moreover, we don't produce it. You can't produce carbon. Okay? These atoms are all inert. We've got the exact same number of carbon atoms from the beginning of the world till today. It just moves around and takes different forms. So sometimes carbon bonds with oxygen and forms a gas called carbon dioxide, which we are all exhaling right now. It's all around the room, carbon dioxide. Sometimes carbon bonds with heavier elements and ends up in the ground. So coal is made of carbon and diamonds are made of carbon, and it cycles around. If we had too much carbon dioxide in the atmosphere, what takes it out of the atmosphere? And by the way, I'm not saying we do.
Plants.
Yeah, green plants and trees, right. They suck the carbon dioxide out of the atmosphere, split it in half, release the oxygen for us to breathe, and then the carbon becomes part of the tree, and when the tree keels over and dies, that's the carbon returning to the earth. So, am I saying we should plant more trees? No, because it's happening anyway. Because human activity produces carbon dioxide, the trees love it. They love carbon dioxide. They're thrilled. They're growing faster because we produce carbon dioxide. More carbon dioxide in the atmosphere, the happier the trees are. Tell this to your environmentalist wacko friends. And the trees are growing and growing and growing. And because of human production of carbon dioxide, the Earth has been getting greener and greener and greener for decades now. Satellite pictures have confirmed this. Every year the Earth keeps getting greener because the trees grow faster and faster because we produce the carbon dioxide, which they're taking out of the atmosphere, releasing the oxygen for us, and returning the carbon to the Earth. It is a self-solving problem. Nothing's wrong. Nothing ever was wrong. Nothing is going to be wrong in this regard in the future either. It's just the natural cycle of nature, and everything's fine. So, I've given this talk in a few different places, and there was a couple interesting questions that arose. If you ask a really good question, you become part of the talk. So, I was in Minnesota speaking to a Republican ladies group, and there was a lady who raised her hand and she said, don't China and India have a problem with overpopulation? And I said, no ma'am. Neither China nor India has ever had a problem with overpopulation. What they both had for a long time was a socialism problem. Socialism was making their people very, very, very poor, because that's what socialism does, is it makes people really, really poor. And population had nothing to do with it. And you don't take my word for it, I can prove it to you without even leaving the room, because for the last 20 years, both China and India have been moving away from socialism toward capitalism. We've been busy going the other way. But they have been leaving socialism to go to capitalism, and now their economy is booming. China and India have the two boomingest economies in the entire world. I wish our economy was booming like that. They've been on fire for 20 years straight, and their population never went down. Their populations continue to go up. You can't tell me they had an overpopulation problem back then if they don't have one now with a bigger population. What they did was they got rid of the socialism, and their problems went away. but I thought it was a good question. And then I was in Florida, and this one was, I don't know, one of those things, it wasn't funny at the moment, but after the fact it kind of became funny. This guy was beat red in the face. The minute I finished, he popped up like a jack-in-the-box in the back row and made a beeline for me. I'm watching this guy crossing the floor and picking up speed as he's going, and I started backing away from my podium, and he zoomed up to my podium, threw his hands down on it, and he said, "Listen," he said, "the earth is finite. The human propensity to reproduce is infinite. There has got to be a point where we simply run out of room." And I said, "No, not true." And I'll tell you what I told him. In fact, I'll ask you what I asked him. I said, "Have you ever been to Arizona?" So have you guys been to Arizona? Who's been to Arizona? I spent 10 years there one summer. Arizona is a fascinatingly unique place because they don't have weather. Nobody listens to a weather report because there's nothing to listen to. It's never rainy, it's never snowy, it's never foggy, it's never chilly, it's never windy. In the summer in Arizona, it's 115 degrees every single solitary day without fail for 6 months straight. And at night, it cools down to 102. Okay, which is why you don't need a weather report, because I just told you the weather report, that's it, okay? And if you'll think about this for just a moment, you will understand why from the beginning of the world until just a couple years ago, Arizona was one of the least populated pieces of land on the face of the earth, because who can live like that? I want you to imagine living in that kind of heat, 24 hours a day for 6 months straight, before air conditioning was invented. Hadn't been invented yet. It's like the entire history of the world up until 100 years ago. No such thing as air conditioning. You gotta be one tough cookie to live like that. And virtually nobody did. And then, just a few years ago, somebody invented air conditioning, and shazam, it's a whole new ballgame. Do you know what's been the fastest growing state in the United States for the last 50 years? From 1970 to today, Arizona. You know why? Air conditioning. It changed everything. When I spoke to the group in Arizona, I told them the state flag of Arizona should have a picture of an air conditioner on it because that's what's made their state. You understand what we did, we humans? We made the earth bigger. We made the earth bigger. We took vast amounts of territory that were previously uninhabitable and made them habitable through human innovation. And it's not just Arizona. South Texas, you could say the same thing, couldn't you? How about Florida? Florida used to be a teeny tiny state with hardly any population until air conditioning came along, and now it is well its way to becoming the biggest state in the country. Okay, we fixed the problems. When I made this point in Florida, a lady raised her hand and said mosquito control too, which is correct, but it's the same point. We solved the problems. At some point, will our descendants be living on other planets? Will we have humans on Mars or the moon? You betcha. Probably won't happen in my lifetime, but it will happen. And the technology that will make it possible will be a direct result of a larger population, which will allow for faster innovation and a bigger pool of knowledge from which everyone can benefit. The future is at least potentially bright if we can avoid the twin dangers of socialism and environmentalism, which is what's endangering that. And there's my economic thought. I'm going to take my last minute and tell you about the books I write, because years ago my friends said you should write a book. And I did, and it was like the wrong book. Everyone thought I was going to write a 500-page tome about economics. But I had an epiphany that people don't read 500-page tomes about economics. If you write something fun and funny and accessible, you reach millions of people who never read the economics book. So my first book was called The New Democrat. It's a parody history of the Obama years done as the Cat in the Hat. Has everyone read The Cat in the Hat? Cat shows up uninvited at this middle-class American home. What's he do when he gets inside? He wrecks the place. And I was thinking it's like Obama, you know? And the fascinating thing about the cat is that he never gets it to the last page of the book. The cat never understands what's obvious to everybody else, and that is that he is the problem. I was like, it's Obama. Can you imagine him ever imagining that he's the problem? Like in a million years, the thought would never cross his mind. And then he's got these two friends, thing one and thing two. Do you remember? they became Pelosi and Reed. And I realized I was writing the first history of the Obama years, all done as the cat in the hat. It goes through bailouts, stimuluses, death panels, everything you remember from 8 fun-filled Obama years, all done as the cat in the hat. I got my first book review, Salon.com, said that this was the most twisted piece of conservative propaganda print matter out there. I was touched, that's on the cover now, and I was moved to write my second book. Whoa! Go back to the Verizon store. Who's read the Lorax by Dr. Seuss? It was a movie a couple years ago. Dr. Seuss was a huge leftist, lifelong member of the Socialist Party. He fills his children's books with socialist lessons for your kids, and I know the left now doesn't like him anymore, but that's what they always do. When you're no longer useful, they throw you under the bus. They throw their own friends under the bus all the time. It's part of being on the left. Anyhow, the Lorax is about an evil capitalist called the Onceler, who cuts down trees and makes consumer goods. And we are taught that that is bad, bad, bad. He drives the trees to extinction. He wipes them out till they're extinct, there's no more trees, and his factory promptly goes out of business because there's no more trees. And I read this to my kids, I said, does that make sense to you? Do you think that capitalists destroy species that their business depends on? Do you think that Colonel Sanders is going to drive the chicken to extinction? No. Is anyone worried about that? Is Colonel Sanders going to throw every last chicken into the fryer until they're extinct and we'll never see another chicken again? I think it's exactly the opposite. I think Colonel Sanders cares more about the survival of the chicken species than anybody on the planet, including the chickens. He's got billions wrapped up in this. There are going to be more chickens as long as Colonel Sanders has anything to say about it. And I'll tell you something else. There are more chickens alive in the world today than ever before in history. Do you know why? Because we like to eat them. That's why. The greatest thing that ever happens to a species is the human beings like to eat you. This is like winning the species lottery. Chickens, cows, wheat, corn, potatoes, tomatoes, name your species. We clear millions of acres just for you. We keep the predators away, we feed you, you get sick, we bring in doctors for you. What other species gets this? Now in the end we kill you and eat you. But that was going to happen anyhow. What do you think happens in the wild? Imagine you are a chicken living in the wild. How do you think your life is going to end? You're going to move to Miami and get a condo on the beach? Okay, you're getting killed and eaten, and far more unpleasantly in the wild than Old MacDonald's farm. So this was a book that desperately needed to be parodied. Mine is called The Gorax because it stars Al Gore as the Lorax character, and it's about how America used to be free and prosperous, and we were prosperous because we were free, and then the environmentalist wacko showed up, and step-by-step, regulation by regulation, started driving everybody out of business. About the time of the last election, I wanted to do something about the Democrats. It's called The Wizard of Iz. It's obviously a parody of The Wizard of Oz. And my first thought was that Bill Clinton made a really great wizard. Because as you will recall, the original wizard is a fake. He's a charlatan. It's all smoke and mirrors. I thought Bill Clinton fit perfectly. When they first meet him in my book, they say, "Are you the Wizard of Iz?" He says, "It all depends on your definition of Iz." And Hillary is the Wicked Witch. Oh, and you remember there was a cowardly lion in the original book? I replaced him with a cowardly rhino. Oh. Who suspects the Democrats are wrong, but he's too scared to do anything about it. He's looking for some courage to do something useful when he gets to Washington. And it's a nice story. It starts when Dorothy's house lands on Obama, and she finds herself in the land of the free lunchkins who've been living off the government for so long that they've forgotten to take care of themselves. My latest one that came out at the end of last year is about the media and Trump. To think that I saw it on CNN Live, narrated by Jim Acosta, is like the Trump years through the eyes of the media. It's like the media versus reality. And I've got one more which is not out, but I finished it, it's in the production process, and I will have it in July, and I started accepting pre-orders on this a little while ago. It's a parody of Black Lives Matter. and the whole race hustling business that we're living in the middle of now, loosely based on Moby Dick. It's called Motley Click, and it's about this ship full of social justice warriors. Who, there's like one of everything. There's like a black guy, an Hispanic guy, a Jewish guy, a Muslim guy, a gay guy. There's like every single category, and they all start executing each other because they keep finding out that they're not quite woke enough. Like they discover some tweet from 10 years ago, and so they make everybody walk the plank. Until it's down to just the captain, who is the one heterosexual white male on the ship, and the black guy, and the captain decides that the black guy just isn't black enough, and he has to go too, and which leads to a big sword fight between the two of them, and that's kind of the climax of the book. Anyhow, if you're interested, I can do a pre-order on that one if you like. The other four, I've got plenty of it, and I'm right over here in the corner. They make cool gifts for like Republicans, if you happen to know any, and I would be more than happy to autograph it. And if you want to order the next one, which will be out in July, I could be happy to oblige you on that also. So are we good? I could take questions, I could sit down and be quiet. What would you like? You want me to take a question? Yes, sir.
How did you get those published?
How did I get them published?
They didn't censor you or shut you off?
Well, we in the 21st century, there's good things and bad things. It's way easier to get things published than it used to be. I mean, these are self-published. I basically work with the guy who prints them. I mean, it's not. I have no editor between me and what comes out. And when you read Motley Click, you'll understand that I don't have an editor. Because there is not an ethnic stereotype under the sun that I don't jump all over in that book. It's very, very ironic. But it's very good. I think that's the one that's going to be in my obituary. Yes, ma'am.
Who does all your illustrations?
Friend of mine.
They're good. Yeah. That's neat.
Yes, ma'am.
Do you do an audible book? You should.
Well, my books are heavily picture-oriented. So
You
that,
have a nice, very interesting voice, too.
well, I appreciate that. But I don't think it would really work. It wouldn't work with my kinds of books because they're very visual. Yes, sir.
I didn't know if you went back to what you were saying. You were talking about China and India moving from socialism to capitalism. So I'm going to surmise that the only reason the Chinese are moving towards capitalism is so they can pay for all of the military things that they're spending so much money on.
Well, sure. I am by no means a fan of the Chinese government. Okay, they are up to no good. They are not our friends. That's without any doubt at all. But my point is an economic point. That the Chinese in the 1970s, when I was growing up, the average person in China was living on about $1 a day. Dollars back then were worth a little more than now, but still, that's as poor as dirt. You're living on $1 a day. Okay? Today, China is way, way, way wealthier than that, and they did that by turning their economy into a more capitalistic one than ours is. They don't have any political freedom in China. If you criticize the government, they're going to take you away in the middle of the night and no one will hear from you again. But as long as you're just trying to make money and do business, they will leave you alone far more than our country will. It's a sad truth that there is more economic freedom in China today than there is in the United States, which is why we're getting poorer and they're getting richer. Okay? So that's a reality. And you're absolutely right. I'm very nervous about where China is going, and this wealth is potentially a danger for us because it's in the service of a very bad regime. That's absolutely true. But it's also true that a free market capitalist model will make your country richer and richer and richer, and a socialistic model will make your country poorer and poorer and poorer. That's without question. Whether you're a nice person or a horrible person, those facts are facts, and that's the way it's going to work. Okay? China's also someday there's an amazing story here, because I don't think there's ever been a case where a country has had no political freedom and gone as far as China has in terms of economic freedom. Milton Friedman back in the 60s said, hypothetically, you could have a free market economy with no political freedom, but no one ever did it quite as much as the Chinese have. My sense, previously, if you'd asked me 20 years ago, I would have said eventually, as the Chinese people get richer and richer, they'll get tired of having no political freedom and overthrow their government. But I might be wrong. They don't seem to be doing that. And this is like uncharted territory. So yeah, there's plenty to be nervous about, but it's still a true phenomenon. Anyhow, are we good? Thank you guys so much. I hope you'll check out my books. Hope to see you all again.